All right, good morning, everyone. I thought I would do a better job of answering um, um, Micah's question about my interest in the opening to the other side of the planet. I think there are a number of different um, points that Lewis adds in just the first paragraph that helps us, I think about and connect this novel to the trilogy as a whole, and then to Out of the Silent Planet in particular. I mentioned in passing just one last night in our discussion, and that is what gets Ransom roped in to this whole adventure is that he's a decent individual who, despite his the nuisance of it and his kind of anger over the situation, can't help himself but care about and help and commit to help a relatively unintelligent woman and her concern for a pretty unintelligent a child of hers, a son of hers. And so that clearly contrasts just in the text with Weston's view, his vision for humanity, that humanity has to be better, can be better, should be better, and individuals like this young boy, and presumably then by extension the mother, are perhaps an embarrassment to humanity and should easily be sacrificed for the improvement of things. So anyways, I realized that that's about, well, I knew last night that's all I gave. But I thought that's not fair. I should offer some other thoughts here. And if you look at the first paragraph, and just as a reminder here, the idea is just playing with the idea that Lewis could be working with the classical standard of great literature, which is one of logographic necessity that's mentioned in the Phaedrus. And the idea is that there is a necessity for every word that's there to be there, no extraneous words to be there, and everything ordered properly, as though your work of literature is a unique species and animal with body parts and structure. It has to have a kind of overarching unity to it that gives meaning to all the different parts. So with that, from that perspective, I just want to point out about 6 or 7 or 8 different points that caught my eye just in the opening paragraph here. And the idea would be that if it's the case, and of course this is a kind of proofs in the pudding, but if it's the case that Lewis has this standard that he's pursuing of logographic necessity, then nothing's an accident, and everything here is designed purposely to advance Lewis's goal for the novel. And so just a number of things that jump out at me here. I'm looking down at the text, but the idea would be once these things are noted, you realize that the weren't necessary in terms of from a reader's perspective. You may say, well, I have no idea why these things are here. And so he could have easily started this novel in a different way. And so where that's the case, it's great to ask the question, well, why are these included? And so you can have here, like the novel begins with the last drops of the thunder shower had hardly ceased falling, when the pedestrian stuffed his map in his pocket, settled his pack more comfortably on his tired shoulders, and stepped out from the shelter of a large chestnut tree into the middle of the road. So, so you can ask the question, okay, well, why begin your novel with a thunder shower? You know, what does that bring to mind? What could that in some ways maybe symbolize, or and so forth? So why begin with the thunder shower? Why begin with the thunder shower when it's basically finishing? And then why call this individual a pedestrian, which is capitalized? And he's clearly traveling, and he's taking shelter under a large chestnut tree. Why a chestnut tree? Why not a maple? Why not a whatever? And then this emphasis that he goes out into the middle of the road. These are all, you could say, unnecessary details. Maybe it's just a good story and you want to talk about thunder showers and pedestrians and chestnut trees and so forth. But you can think of various literary allusions and also think about, well, what is a thunder shower, and what is it like to go through a thunder shower, and what is in Ransom's mind if you were put in his place, and what is his relation to that thunder shower? Does it annoy him? Does he mind it at all? Is it just part of something that he actually enjoys? And later on, he does not, through this whole account, there's no indication that he's that this bothers him at all, that he finds this walking out in this landscape pleasant. He enjoys it. So yeah, so what is a thunder shower? And I guess one way to think of it is this relationship of Ransom to the thunder shower a way of thinking about Ransom's relationship to nature, and of course the nature of nature and the relationship of human beings to nature is a very important question, and certainly it's central to the question of to the text of his work, The Abolition of Man. That is nature something that man should submit to and orient himself to and find meaning within that natural order, or is nature something that needs to be conquered? And so already that question of man's relationship to nature is embedded in that first line. Okay, we can talk about a couple other things here, but we could spend a lot of time on this stuff. But the idea of the middle of the road, perhaps an allusion to Dante, who is himself a walker, a pedestrian, who has to go through the afterlife. He goes all the way through hell, purgatory, and heaven in order to orient himself morally. And of course, this is, he finds himself lost in the middle of his life. So yeah, maybe an illusion there. Then you can see here a violent yellow sunset was pouring through a rift in the clouds to westward, but straight ahead over the hills, the sky was the color of dark slate. Okay, so that's very descriptive, vivid. You can say, well, he's just a good writer and he wants you to see a yellow sunset in the middle of, dark, stormy weather. Okay, well, that's fine. But you could also ask, well, why is this a violent yellow sunset? What's so violent about a yellow sunset? And I would just suggest that perhaps this is a way of, and all these things, perhaps all these little details are a way of Lewis thinking about the world that he lives in, especially in terms of his world shaped by modern science and scientism and so forth, and the Enlightenment, and then the 20th century, the living through World War I, World War II. And perhaps this is a nice way to think about someone who has gone through a very tumultuous experience, and perhaps the West could be encapsulated, West at this time in history, could be nicely symbolized and encapsulated as a violent yellow sunset peering out from a very dark, slated heaven, the skies. Well, could we think of the Enlightenment project, which of course the sun and Enlightenment, as having come in some sense to a point of crisis? And it's bred the 20th century. And you might think, well, 20th century is pretty violent. And of course, you have Spengler's view that the West was coming to an end, and maybe the West is in sunset. Maybe the West is coming to an end, and maybe the Enlightenment project is grinding itself to a halt in a kind of violent Enlightenment storm, with a kind of godless, dark slate environment. Perhaps, I mean, I don't know for sure, but it doesn't take too much of an imagination once you have that conception in mind to see how you can make connections there. Other things here, it's this hotel, and there's this old kindly landlord that's evidently been retired, and now this person's been replaced by this lady who she's a British innkeeper who holds the idea that people are a nuisance, and now this is an inhospitable little hotel. Okay, well, that's an interesting thought. Is this a kind of social commentary on one, hospitality is extremely important. How do you treat strangers, people that you don't know, people that you have no familial ties to, people that are not perhaps even citizens of your country? How do you treat those people? And this has a very, very long history with deep, deep implications. So if you go back to the foundations of Western Civ in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, especially the Odyssey, but also in the Old Testament, your treatment of strangers is a tremendous indication as to the relative quality of your moral life and also the relative quality of your society. And is this a nice short way of showing that society has become it's degenerated, so that now others, even under the economic impetus of taking money to house strangers, that there's a strange antisocial character to the world as he knows it, such that people are seen as a nuisance, and that you don't treat strangers properly. You don't give humans the due of these people that you don't know anything about, that you have no obligations to, that you do not treat them as though they have an inherent value to them. Instead, they're just a nuisance. And is this a good indication? Is this a way of saying this is part of the social degeneration? And later on, it turns into the idea of, where's community? Where are we finding community in the modern world? If we go beyond this first paragraph, Ransom is solitary, the solitary walker. And on the other hand, the option seems to be that you can find order and meaning, not necessarily meaning, but perhaps, but you can find order and connection to others through military, but the options are either that you're free from people or that your social life is imposed upon you through a kind of military existence, neither of which are community. So all these things, again, this is suggestive, but I think all these things really point, I think, into viewing the trilogy as, in some sense, and maybe in some profound sense, as Lewis's response to the problem of the modern world as he sees it. So this is much more profound than just some nice stories. And of course, this is going to have to eventually lead to dealing with the superstition of the modern scientific world in the way that it's split between maybe the sci-fi fantasies, which distort the possibility of thinking of intelligence and spirit of human beings as being benign and good, as though there could be angels and there could be Malelil, there could be a divine figure, as opposed to the modern scientific imagination that any kind of intelligence that's superhuman necessarily must be some kind of evil creature or grotesque. Well, grotesque is probably a bad word for it, but evil, sinister, and creepy, bug-like things and so forth. So you're going to have to redefine. You're going to have to deal and disentangle, which happens to Ransom, disentangle that whole superstition. That one half being kind of the sci-fi, which is captured the human imagination. The other half being, as we'll see in the later books, Weston's. The infection of Weston's scientific understanding and pursuits, the infection of that with a pernicious desire to control nature, not just know it, but to control it, and then to reshape humanity in the image of the elites, intelligence, and so forth. Okay, so anyways, there's a lot more here, but I thought at least I should give you a little more of my thoughts. Last night, actually, I was pretty tired, so I didn't want to get into it in great detail. At least I thought I'd give you something to work with. And I think I think Lewis has earned a place where we treat him with considerable respect, meaning that if there's something in his book that doesn't make sense or seems irrelevant, it probably means that it's simply a reflection on our own lack of understanding, as opposed to Lewis's capacity to be an effective writer. Okay, hope this helps. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'm sure we'll catch you at some time.